I was pedaling slowly along the old Forest Service road, the one that wound between cedar trunks and patches of soft mud, when I first saw the flashing hazard lights. At that hour, the woods were quiet, the morning mist still clinging low to the ground, and nothing ever broke the silence except birds or the occasional fallen branch. So the blinking lights looked wrong, out of place, almost alarming. As I rode closer, I heard hurried voices. A white rescue truck stood sideways across the road, its back doors open. Two men were lifting something massive onto a reinforced stretcher. At first I couldn't see what it was, not until one of them shifted and the beam of a portable lamp caught a shape that made my breath hitch. A giant brown bear lay motionless on the stretcher. Her chest rose in small, ragged movements, barely noticeable under the weight of her thick fur. Dried blood stained her flank, and her head hung to the side as if she no longer had the strength to lift it. One of the rescuers looked up and noticed me. He motioned for me to stay back, saying they had to move quickly, that she wouldn't last long without medical attention. He explained they'd found her collapsed near a fallen log, barely conscious, possibly after a fight or a fall. They didn't know. They just knew time was running out. While they secured straps around her, I stepped off my bike and scanned the ground without really knowing why. Something about the scene felt incomplete. Then I saw it. A tiny paw print pressed into the mud near the ditch. It was small, much too small to belong to the bear lying on the stretcher. A few inches away, another print, and beside that, faint scratches on a rock, like a young animal had stumbled while scrambling for cover. I asked the rescuers if the bear had cubs. The man tightening the straps shook his head and said they hadn't seen any. His voice was firm, but his eyes didn't match. They were tired, frantic, and focused on the mother. The men lifted the stretcher into the truck with a struggle. The bear's weight made the metal groan. They slammed the doors shut, jumped inside, and within moments the vehicle lurched forward, throwing dust into the air as it sped down the road. I stood alone with my bike, listening to the fading engine. The forest slowly returned to its natural sounds, the distant trill of a bird, the rustle of leaves. But underneath those sounds was something else, a feeling I couldn't shake. I walked toward the spot where I'd seen the paw prints. The mud was still fresh, the impressions sharp. I crouched lower, brushing aside a few twigs. The tracks continued into the underbrush, small and uncertain. Then I heard it, a faint, trembling sound, so soft I almost convinced myself it was just the wind bending wet leaves. But it came again, a thin, frightened whimper. Something was watching me from the shadows. I didn't sleep that night. The faint whimper I'd heard in the bushes stayed glued to my thoughts, replaying in my head long after I left the forest. By morning, I knew going back alone would be reckless, so I drove to the ranger station and found Logan. Logan was the kind of man who didn't waste words. When I told him what I'd seen, the prints, the scratches, the sound, he didn't dismiss it or try to explain it away. He simply grabbed his pack, checked his radio, and told me to lead the way. When we returned to the site, the forest looked different in daylight. Softer, calmer, but the details that mattered hadn't changed. I pointed out the small paw prints near the ditch, still clearly visible in the damp mud. Logan crouched down, tracing the outline with 2 fingers. "These are fresh," he said, "and there's more than one." We followed the prints further into the trees. A few feet ahead, Logan stopped again. On the bark of a leaning pine were thin, frantic claw marks, no longer than a thumb. Higher up, shallow teeth marks dotted the wood, the kind of marks young cubs leave when they climb in a panic. "There are 2 of them," Logan said quietly. "Different spacing, different size. Both young." The trail wound deeper into the brush, but it wasn't a straight path. The cubs had doubled back several times, circling the same logs, stumbling over the same roots. Their tracks overlapped, then vanished in patches of dry leaves, only to reappear farther ahead. "Cubs this young don't move fast," Logan said, pushing aside a branch, "unless something scared them." We kept searching, calling softly, trying not to sound threatening. But the forest swallowed our voices. There was no answering cry, no rustle of movement, just the unsettling quiet of animals hiding out of terror. We were close to giving up on that stretch when Logan paused. He lifted his hand for silence, then stepped toward a cluster of boulders at the base of a slope. "Listen." At first I heard nothing. Then, faintly, a soft scraping sound. Not loud, more like something shifting its weight, but too weak to do more. Logan squeezed between two rocks, then suddenly dropped to one knee. "Found one," he called, his voice low but urgent. I climbed after him and saw it. A tiny brown cub wedged between two stones, half pressed into the dirt. Its sides rose in shallow, uneven breaths. Its eyes were half closed, its fur dusty and damp. It didn't react when I reached toward it. It didn't even lift its head. It had likely been stuck there since the night before. Logan gently freed it, supporting its small body with both hands. The cub whimpered once, a thin, exhausted sound, then sagged against his arm. "We need to get it warmed up," Logan said. "It won't last long like this." I looked around, expecting to see another small shape hiding nearby. But there was nothing. No second cub. No tracks leading away. No rustle in the brush. Just silence. And one set of tiny paw prints ending abruptly at the stones, while the other disappeared into the forest without a trace. We didn't waste a second getting the first cub out of the rocks and wrapped against Logan's chest. Its body was cold enough to worry both of us. Its paws hung limp, and every breath came as a faint flutter. Logan pulled his jacket tighter around it, shielding it from the gusts of wind slipping through the trees. His cabin wasn't far, maybe a 15-minute hike if we moved quickly. The trail wound through low brush and uneven roots, but we made it in 10. Logan pushed the door open with his shoulder, and warm air drifted out from the wood-burning stove he kept running through colder months. Inside, we set the cub near the fire and rubbed its sides gently, trying to bring its temperature up. After a few minutes, its ears twitched, just a tiny movement, but enough to make us both breathe easier. Logan prepared a warm cloth and laid it over the cub like a blanket. But there was no comfort in the moment. We both knew the truth. There were two sets of tracks, and only one cub was here. If the second one was still alive, every hour in the cold would drain what little strength it had. Waiting until morning wasn't an option. Logan shook his head when I said I was going back out. "It's pitch black out there," he told me. "You can't track anything at night." "Maybe not," I said, "but I can listen." A moment passed before he grabbed his flashlight and an extra battery pack. "If you're going, I'm not letting you go alone." Night had swallowed the forest entirely by the time we stepped outside again. Our lights cut thin paths through the darkness, revealing only fragments: bark, leaves, pieces of broken branches. Every sound felt amplified. Every movement felt wrong. We headed back to the slope where we found the first cub, then followed the disappearing trail deeper into the woods. Logan kept scanning the ground while I scanned the shadows between trees. Then a sound cracked through the silence. A heavy, deliberate step, followed by another. Logan's flashlight jerked upward. Somewhere ahead, between the trees, a pair of dim red reflections blinked. They hovered at the height of an adult bear's eyes. "Male," Logan muttered. "If he's the one that scared the cubs, he might still be circling." My pulse hammered in my ears as we moved in the opposite direction, keeping our lights low. Male bears rarely ignored cubs, even ones that weren't theirs. Sometimes especially those. A few hundred feet away, we found a patch of forest floor torn apart, clumps of dirt thrown aside, broken twigs everywhere, and the deep imprint of a large paw pressed into the mud. Something had struggled here recently, but there was no sign of the cub. We crouched in silence, listening for anything we could use. For several minutes, nothing moved but the branches above us. Then, just as we started to reposition, a sound drifted through the darkness, a faint, quivering squeak. Not from the torn-up clearing, not from anywhere we had searched. It came from behind us, from deep in an entirely different direction. The squeak came again, thin, trembling, barely cutting through the dense night air, but it was enough. Logan swung his flashlight toward the sound while I tried to pinpoint the direction. It wasn't coming from anywhere near the clearing we had searched. It was deeper, lower, closer to the marshy stretch of forest where roots twisted out of the ground like broken ribs. We moved quickly but carefully, listening between each step. The forest here held moisture in the air, making everything feel colder. Branches brushed our arms, wet from the night mist. The smell of damp earth and rotting wood grew stronger as the ground softened beneath our boots. Logan whispered for me to stop. He raised his beam slightly, sweeping it over a cluster of massive roots that curled upward from a toppled tree. And then we saw it. The second cub lay in a shallow pool formed between the tangled roots, a mix of rainwater, mud, and fallen needles. Its tiny body shivered uncontrollably, every breath sounding like a weak hiccup. Its fur was soaked and clung to its sides, making it look even smaller than it was. It didn't react when Logan stepped closer. Its eyes were half-lidded, cloudy with exhaustion. I knelt beside it, careful not to splash the cold water. When my hand brushed the cub's shoulder, it let out a faint, breathless whine, then burrowed its nose deeper into the wet leaves as if trying to hide from the night itself. Logan crouched and scanned the area around us. Fresh tracks, broad, deep, unmistakable, circled the root cluster. The male bear had been here, recently. The impressions were sharp, edges still intact. He might have passed by only minutes before we arrived. "We can't stay here," Logan said quietly. "Not for a second longer." He wrapped the cub in his spare flannel, pulling it tight against its trembling body. I took it in my arms so he could keep the flashlight steady. The cub felt like a soaked rag, light, freezing, almost limp. I could feel its heartbeat, faint but still there. We turned back the way we came, but the forest felt different now, crowded, suffocating, alive with movement. As we hurried between the trees, a branch snapped somewhere behind us. Not the dry pop of a twig, but the sharp crack of something heavy stepping where it shouldn't. Logan shot a look over his shoulder, raising the beam just high enough to illuminate shifting shadows. Something big moved between the trunks, slow, deliberate, taking its time. "Keep going," he whispered. "Don't stop." The cub whimpered softly in my arms, the sound echoing far louder than it should have. Another heavy footfall followed, then another. We picked up our pace, weaving between roots and fallen limbs, trying not to trip. A pale opening in the trees appeared ahead, the start of the marsh crossing. A narrow wooden footbridge stretched over the dark water, old and sagging, its boards warped by years of moisture. Logan stepped onto it first. "Careful," he said. "Stay close." The bridge groaned under his weight, but held. I followed, holding the cub close, adjusting my balance with each step. Halfway across, a board beneath me shifted sharply. My foot punched through the rotten wood with a loud crack, plunging straight into the icy water below. I staggered forward, nearly falling headfirst. My arms tightened around the cub, keeping it above the murky surface. Logan lunged, grabbing the back of my jacket with one hand and hauling me upward with a strained grunt. I pulled my leg out of the broken gap, soaked and shaking. We didn't speak. There was no time. We pushed through the remaining stretch of forest, the ground rising slightly as we neared firmer terrain. But the sounds behind us didn't stop. Something heavy was following, branches shifting, leaves parting, the deep rhythm of steps that couldn't be mistaken. When we finally stopped to catch our breath, Logan raised his flashlight once more. The beam cut through the darkness and landed on something that froze us both. A massive, dark silhouette stood ahead, blocking the faint outline of the trail. Broad shoulders, thick neck, unmoving, but very much alive. It wasn't behind us anymore. It was right in front of us. The silhouette stood perfectly still, blocking the narrow trail ahead as if it had grown from the darkness itself. For a heartbeat, I felt the cub tremble in my arms, its tiny claws twitching against my jacket like fragile sparks of life refusing to go out. Logan tightened his grip on the flashlight, lifting it slowly, deliberately. The beam climbed the shape, broad shoulders, thick outline, and then caught on something unexpected. Not fur. Fabric. A reflective strip glinted sharply under the light. Before either of us spoke, a voice cut through the tension, strained, cautious, undeniably human. "Logan? Cole, that you?" My lungs emptied all at once. Relief washed through me, so hard my legs nearly buckled. The dark figure stepped closer, followed by another. Two volunteers emerged into the glow of our flashlights, their rescue vests shining like floating patches in the dark. "We've been looking everywhere for you," the taller one said, panting from the climb. "The center called us back. The bear you found, the big one, she's lactating. She has cubs. We couldn't risk leaving them behind." Logan let out a shaky, humorless laugh, the kind a man makes when fear finally loosens its grip. "Well, you found us. And both cubs." The volunteers rushed closer. When they saw the small bundle pressed to my chest, their expressions shifted instantly, from urgency to tenderness. One knelt down, moving with practiced precision, checking the cub's breathing, temperature, circulation. His hands were steady and gentle, The way people move when they've spent years balancing life on the edge. "This little one's ice cold," he murmured. "We need to warm them both immediately. Their mother made it through surgery, but she'll stay weak unless the cubs survive too." Hearing that she was alive, hit me harder than I expected. We formed a tight group as we made our way back toward Logan's cabin. The presence of extra people changed the forest. The darkness didn't feel predatory anymore. It felt cautious, keeping its distance. Even the wind seemed to pull back, as if recognizing that the night no longer had the upper hand. When the cabin finally came into view, the first cub inside let out a tiny cry, somehow recognizing the movement and voices. The volunteers moved with renewed urgency. They placed both cubs into insulated carriers lined with soft, heat-retaining fabric. Warm pads activated beneath the tiny bodies, and oxygen vents hissed quietly. One of the volunteers explained that they would bottle feed the cubs every couple of hours, watch for tremors, dehydration, and check for internal injuries. Their tone was calm, but the sharp focus in their eyes said it all. Survival was not guaranteed, but hope was real. Before the team left, the taller volunteer paused beside me. He placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice weighed with sincerity. "If you two hadn't acted when you did, these cubs would have never seen another morning. You did the right thing, even when it was dangerous." When the door shut behind them, the cabin fell into a heavy, exhausted silence. Logan collapsed into a chair, rubbing his face with both hands as the long night finally settled on him. I lowered myself into a seat across from him, staring at the small hollow in the blanket where one cub had lain only moments earlier. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The only sounds were the creaking of the cooling stove and the muted hum of wind brushing the shingles. 3 days passed before either of us felt like ourselves again. I was repairing a section of fence behind my house when my phone buzzed. Seeing Logan's name brought back the tension instantly, but his voice, light, warm, almost disbelieving, told me this call was different. "She made it," he said. "The vets say the surgery went better than expected. She's responsive, moving a little, and they placed the cubs in the same rehabilitation ward. She can smell them. The little ones have calmed down since they arrived." For a moment I couldn't speak. I leaned against the wooden post, the memory of her limp form on the stretcher flashing through my mind. The shallow breaths, the dried blood, the quiet certainty that she might not survive the drive. But she did. Logan continued, but his voice softened. "The volunteers wanted you to know. They rushed because they were scared. They saw how bad she was and panicked. They missed the cubs, but it wasn't neglect. They thought she would die if they waited. They wanted to save her." I understood that more deeply than I could admit. The forest twists decisions, pressures people into choices that feel wrong even when they're necessary. Fear narrows the world to a tunnel. Urgency erases the edges. But good intentions had survived the mistakes, and the mistakes had been corrected. A few mornings later, I took my bike to the same forest road, following the familiar curve of the trail. The air was cool enough to sting my lungs, but sunlight spilled between the branches in long, golden ribbons. Birds hopped through the pines, unbothered, singing into the open quiet. When I reached the bend where the rescue truck had once stood, hazard lights flashing in the mist, I slowed to a stop. I could almost see the stretcher again, the motionless bear, the faint prints in the mud. But this time something different settled inside me. Not dread, not fear, a kind of peace. Some roads stay heavy forever, but others lighten when you walk them again, when the endings change. The forest didn't feel like a place of threat anymore. It felt like a place where life, against all odds, had been given a second chance. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories. And now just click the playlist or the next video on your screen.